The Seventh Amendment to the United States Constitution, which reads as follows. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. The Seventh Amendment was ratified by the states on December 15, 1791, and is part of the Bill of Rights. You see, the original Constitution did not contain a provision for jury trials in civil cases, so the Seventh Amendment solved that problem. Today, any dispute that involves amounts less than $75,000 will not be handled in the federal courts anymore. Those cases are better handled in the state courts. Okay, after fighting a bloody revolution, our nation's founding fathers acquired a healthy fear of government power. Because of this, they relied heavily upon the power of the citizen, the power of the jury to check our servant government's power. The suspension of jury trials by the King of England was one of the reasons listed in the Declaration of Independence that led to our Revolutionary War. Access to the courts is an extremely important, inalienable right. John Adams said this about the jury system. As the Constitution requires, the popular branch of the legislature should have an absolute check so as to put a peremptory negative upon every act of the government. It requires that the common people should have as complete a control, a decisive and negative in every judgment of a court of judicature, unquote. The Seventh Amendment, as I said earlier, is an extremely important amendment. It protects and guarantees the inalienable right to access the civil courts. Civil cases are how we settle disputes between private parties. The Seventh Amendment ensures that the average Joe has the power to civilly to seek restitution when someone violates his or her life, liberty, and property. It also settles disputes relating to claims for money by citizens against government or claims by the government against the citizens. Damages for money are the primary remedy in civil cases. The Seventh Amendment guarantees the right to a trial by jury in federal courts. It does not apply to cases in state courts. States guarantee this right through their own state constitutions. The U.S. Constitution organized the government into three separate distinct branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, limiting the power of each branch to certain specific functions. The legislature creates law. It's set down and based on the constitutional mandates. When a legislator passes a law, he passes a law that follows the Constitution. That's the legislative job, to create laws that follow the Constitution. The executive branch enforces the law. They're the ones that carry out all the law enforcement for all the laws that are enacted by Congress. But the executive branch, too, has to follow the mandates of the Constitution. So if the legislator passes an unconstitutional law, the executive branch is under no obligation to enforce that law. And then we have the judicial branch of government, which reviews and applies law. It is not there to interpret law. Everybody says, well, the courts will interpret the Constitution. If the Constitution had to be interpreted, then it would be null and void because it would be void for vagueness. The law has to be clear. Everyone has to be able to understand it without having to turn to the courts to explain to them how that works. If the courts have to explain it, then the law is no good and it doesn't meet constitutional muster. So the judiciary is there to review and apply the law, not to interpret. Okay? The common law of England was a law practiced by the people at the time the Seventh Amendment was ratified, and it still remains that way today. The common law, what it means, the common law just means the common customs and practices, the legal practices of the people of that time. And the common law is the unwritten law. Now, once the common law is published or written down, it becomes constitutional or statutory law. The common law defines the types of cases that are to be decided by a jury and reserves other cases for judges to decide. We call those bench trials, with the judge deciding the case without a jury. Cases that are to be tried by a judge, bench trials, are known as equity cases. Equity law deals with things like injunctions, family law, probate, where judges are bound by the rules of equity, which are designed to be fair and just. Today, equity law is mostly addressed by statute, but it's still decided by judges, not juries, for the decision of the cases. The jury is to decide the facts of the case and make decisions based upon the law. The judge instructs the jury on the law, and the jury is to apply the law to the facts. A jury's role is to determine the facts of the case by weighing the evidence and deciding what was believable. And in civil cases, this is called beyond a preponderance of evidence, the majority of the vote. In other words, when the jury votes, tilting the scales more to one side than the other, and that's how the cases are decided. Unlike a criminal trial where the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, there has to be no question in your mind that the person that's accused has actually committed a crime, and the jury's vote must be unanimous. At common law, as well as today, judges are able in extraordinary circumstances to set aside or modify a jury's decision. While this is true in civil cases, a judge in a criminal proceeding cannot alter a not guilty verdict of a jury, as it would run afoul of the Fifth Amendment guarantee against double jeopardy. The Seventh Amendment is where the rubber meets the road. It is through the court process that we, the people, have an enormous amount of power over our lives and civil government. Whether you're serving on a criminal trial jury, judging the law as well as the fact, or prosecuting a civil case, the court system is where a citizen can change the law and or get restitution for things like breach of contract, personal damage, personal injury, a wrongful act done willfully, negligently, or in circumstances involving strict liability, just to name a few. The court system is also to be used to keep our servant government in line. As we all know, from time to time, our servant governments get out of line, don't they? The Seventh Amendment guarantees a sovereign citizen his or her right to redress government through the federal court system. In order to effectively protect one's life, liberty, and property, it's imperative that a sovereign citizen learn how to access and use our court system, both state and federal. If you don't know how to prosecute and or defend your rights, then you are going to be the victim. A victim of an overzealous government servant, or the victim of the enormous attorney fees if you hire a lawyer to fight your battles. But either way, you're the victim. Now, there have been times when I have had to file what they call a petition for a writ of mandamus, moving the court to force a government agent to do his or her job, or a petition for a writ of prohibition, which stops a government agent from breaking the law or violating a constitutionally protected right. The courts are where a citizen can make big changes for him or herself, as well as making big changes for the whole community. See, in 1977, while talking to the American Bar Association, the then Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Warren E. Burger, said that 90% of all trial lawyers were incompetent. 90%. Can you believe that? By the way, it's out of this 90% of incompetent trial lawyers that most of the judges come from. That's scary. When I heard this, I realized that all I had to do was become incompetent in law and courtroom procedure, and I would be equal to 90% of the lawyers that I would be up against. I also realized that if I took the time to become competent, well, then I would be in the upper 10%, or at least a notch or two above the competition, wouldn't I? So that's what I did. I became competent in law and courtroom procedure. I became a competent pro se litigant. And pro se means literally on behalf of themselves. I learned to solve my own legal problems. And guess what? I'm not the victim of government anymore. I'm not the victim of anyone anymore. It's a great feeling. You see, the Seventh Amendment protects your right to be heard in court, a place to effectively prosecute and defend your life, liberty, or property, a place where you can hold your government in check. I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong, and if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem.